Ani, bonjour. Welcome everyone to the fourth installment of CROSH COVID Conversations. My name is Toby Mankus and I'm the Science Communication Officer at CROSH, the Center for Research in Occupational Safety and Health. We're streaming live from the CROSH lab of Laurentian University. We acknowledge the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850 and recognize that Laurentian University is located on the traditional grounds of the Atikameksheng Anishinaabe. The city of Greater Sudbury also includes the traditional lands of Wahnapitae First Nation. CROSH COVID Conversations is a 5-part webinar series of the intersection of occupational safety and health and COVID-19. Our 2 panelists will speak for 15 minutes each, and then we'll have 10 minutes of audience questions. You can enter your questions at any time in the chat function of the platform you're watching this on. I will then ask your questions to our panelists during the Q&A section. Today, our topic is crisis and opportunity in the workplace. Our panelists are Dr. Diana Cohlic and Dr. Anne Pegoraro. Dr. Diana Cohlic is a clinical social worker with a small private practice and is a full professor in the School of Social Work at Laurentian University. Since 2005, her research program has focused on studying the benefits of an arts-based mindfulness group intervention for developing resilience. Her publications include the book Mindfulness, a guide for human service professionals. More information can be found at www.dianacohlic.com. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Cohlic.
Thank you for inviting me, and good afternoon, everybody. Today, I'm going to begin by making some comments about the big picture, and I'm going to end with talking about some individual actions that can help us to cope and build resilience. So in the spring, I found out about a cell film festival at McGill University. So cell films are short films that you make using your smartphone. I never made a cell film before, but I thought it would be a really fun and creative thing to learn how to do. So the theme for this year's festival was, what are you experiencing in the time of distancing? So I'd like to show you my cell film to start. It's only 1 minute and 20 seconds. So Toby, if we can play.
The pandemic is changing things. Across Canada, people are growing and creating nourishing food. Recognizing the resilience of nature. Honoring relationships. Cooperating to accomplish big goals. Valuing caregiving work. Understanding and appreciating competent leadership, and experiencing wonder in the small things that aren't actually all that small. Can we build on this mindfulness and create a more compassionate, sustainable, and resilient country? The crisis we're in has opened the door for this opportunity. Come on, Canada. Let's do this for our communities, families, ourselves, and the world.
Okay, so I wanted to show you that because I think it relates directly to the talk today. And I made this cell film in the spring shortly after we had entered the crisis. So what I saw were people reevaluating their priorities and thinking about what's most important in life, which often happens due to crisis, right? So crisis and disasters often force us to evaluate our values and ways of doing things. So what I saw were people talking about focusing on relationships, growing and creating good food, being creative, appreciating the natural world. So my story in the cell film was that this is an opportunity for us to change the way we're going about doing things to create a more equitable and sustainable world. So certainly this pandemic has helped to bring to people's awareness how many of our systems and ways of doing things are not working for too many people. So for one example, in terms of work, the pandemic has highlighted how essential work, such as caring for our elderly, is grossly undervalued and underpaid, obviously with dire consequences. Another example would be the lack of access to childcare and the impact of that on families, and especially women in their ability to remain engaged with work. Another example would be the lack of PPE for healthcare workers, which was actually a surprise to me, that people who we trust with our lives don't have the equipment that they need to do their job. So resilience is often understood as the process of adapting to diversity or bouncing back from adversity. But I would really encourage you to think about resilience as much more than an individual characteristic that you either have or you don't have. So just yesterday, I was reading an article that was criticizing the concept of resilience because the way it's understood by many ignores larger systems that impact on people's lives, which I agree is highly problematic. So I would encourage you to think about resilience as something that goes beyond an individual focus. So we have a responsibility to create and offer relevant resources that people need to be healthy. And I think we all benefit when our community members are healthy and happy and can live to their potential. And conversely, we struggle as a community when people don't have access to what they need. So workplaces and communities can also be resilient or not based on a variety of factors. So, for example, when I started working in 2001, I had access to one mental health day per month that I could do I could do whatever I wanted on that day. I had weekly supervision and support, and I had regular access to training that was provided by the agency. So that for sure improved my effectiveness as a practitioner and my resilience, but it also created a resilient agency. And sadly, many of these things are no longer available to mental health workers. And in fact, many of us, and this is true not just in the mental health field, but in almost every professional field that I can think of, that people are told now that it's solely our responsibility to engage in self-care. And if you're struggling, then you must be doing something wrong. And I would argue that agencies and organizations also have an important responsibility to support their workers and to create a context within which we can thrive. So it's obvious to me, given the work that I've done as a clinical social worker and psychotherapist, that people have amazing abilities to survive and thrive. And, most of us are going to bounce back from this pandemic if we have the supports we need and if we engage in helpful processes. Some of you will even move beyond where you are now to a place where you achieve growth that wouldn't have happened if the crisis didn't occur. So this process relates to a concept called posttraumatic growth, which speaks to the ability of people to grow beyond the point at which they were before the crisis hit. So a really simple example would be cancer, and I'm sure you all know people maybe who have got cancer who would say, they are actually happy that happened, or they are grateful that it happened because it made them reevaluate, priorities in their life and realize, I guess, what's really important to living a healthy life. So to end, I'd like to sort of mention some things that you can do to cope better in your personal and professional life. So I think one of the most important things is to practice self-compassion and non-judgment. So almost everyone that I work with in my practice judges their feelings and their thoughts. I also see this a lot in students. So, people tell themselves things like, well, I shouldn't be feeling that, or they feel guilty for having a feeling or a thought. And, we have to work to really normalize our feelings and thoughts, and to understand that we're not living in a regular moment right now. So it's normal to have off days. And when you judge a feeling, when you tell yourself you shouldn't feel something, you really are making it worse for yourself, because you're repressing that feeling. And if you do that, your feelings are just going to build up, and then they're going to become stronger. So, and there's a lot of material you can read on self-compassion on the internet that have sort of different activities you can do, self-compassion meditations, that kind of thing. The other thing that's important that we know from research is this question of meaning, and we know that finding meaning in life is one of the most important things to being content and being happy. And I know for a lot of people right now, they've lost things in their life maybe that brought them the most meaning. So, you know, you can think about that, and if you can, think of something else that you can do in your life that will bring you meaning. So that's really important. And I guess the third thing is to really try and practice acceptance, and bringing your focus back to what you control. So again, a lot of people are focused on other people. So they're focused on what other people are doing, what other people are feeling, what people are thinking and saying about you, you know, being worried about if other people are happy. And the fact is if your focus is there, you know, that's a really exhausting way to live your life. You're going to be tired, and it also creates a lot of anxiety. So try and notice if that's where your focus is, and bring your focus and attention and energy back to yourself, and ask yourself, like, what do you control? So, you know, we control lots of things. You know, regarding the pandemic, we control whether we wear a mask, we control our social distancing, we control how kind we are to ourselves. So, and you know, and also how kind we are to others. Like, we control ideally how we are in the world, and our values and where our energy is going. So again, I strongly encourage you to sort of think about that, and like I said, bring your focus back to yourself, and think about what you control if you're worried too much about other people. So yeah, I'm not sure. Do I have a few minutes left?
Absolutely, Diane. If you have a few more things to say, we've got a few more minutes that you can go into, or you can save it for the question and answer. It's okay. Whatever you.
I can just give you a really simple example of the control thing. You know, so when you go into a store, right? I mean, I think what I'm seeing, at least in Sudbury, is that most people are wearing masks, which is really great. But early on in the pandemic, not everybody was. So you might go into a store and see that, oh, lots of people aren't wearing a mask, and you know, that might make you angry or frustrated. And then you might spend your whole time there being angry about what's happening. But like I said, you don't control other people. So if you just kind of notice that feeling, you know, acknowledge it, realize it, understand why it's there, and bring yourself back to yourself, then you can spend that time shopping, doing whatever you need without all of that anger and frustration, right? Or you can make a decision to leave. Like, if it's too stressful for you, then you know, you can leave, right? Because those are the kinds of things we're in control of. So that's just a simple example to sort of illustrate what I was talking about. But I think I'll wrap it up there.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Diana. That's some very some important insights, and I think we'll have some really great questions to get into in the question and answer. So thank you for sharing that with us. Our second panelist today is Dr. Anne Pegoraro. Anne is the Lang Chair in Sport Management and currently holds an appointment as full professor in the School of Hospitality, Food and Tourism, all at the University of Guelph. Dr. Pegoraro is also the co-director of the National Network for Research on Gender Equity in Canadian Sport. Dr. Pegoraro holds a doctorate from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and an MBA from Laurentian University. She is an experienced leader with a demonstrated history of working with the industry. Dr. Pegoraro is a strong professional, skilled in applied research, partnership development, digital media, gender equity, nonprofit organizations, and sport consumer behavior. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Pegoraro.
So the first thing I learned is I should make that shorter. Thanks for having me. I will say I loved what Diana had to say. I'm still processing some of it, so hopefully we'll get some more of it into the question period. So they asked me today, CROSH asked me to talk a little bit about crisis as opportunity from sort of a management perspective. So not necessarily something I research all the time, but I did some reading and I thought I'd share what I found out with everyone. I'll take you a little bit through history and then think a little bit about what we could be doing now inside your companies or your corporations. A lot of time when we think of the word crisis, we think of it as a negative, right? And it usually is to start. It's something that's a tragedy or an event that threatens you, threatens your company, threatens operations, and either could be financial or have a reputation problem. So we think of it as a negative, and that's the way we first frame our thoughts around a crisis. So I'm going to challenge you a little bit to think about, during these times, we've already seen new cooperative behaviors, new systems, new structures. So we're already seeing positive response to this. So let's keep that in mind as we go through this a little bit. When we look at how in the past crisis has turned into opportunity, we sort of see some areas in history that can teach us that changes have come from crisis, either in one company, system-wide, industry-wide, or globally. So usually there's things like systemic change we see, new models of cooperation that come together, new talent or new people coming to the forefront we hadn't thought of that could lead. Lots of times it has to do about rapid problem solving and innovation. I think we've already seen some of that happening in our own country and dealing with COVID. And then ultimately policy changes at government levels we see as well. And we're already, I think, again, seeing some of those happen. So let me start a little bit with history, and I will go to some negative tragedies or crisis to start. Let's talk about some wars and what's come positively out of war. And when you think about war, there's mostly a lot of negativity that comes with it. If we go way back into the 1600s, there was a 30-year war in Europe that had a lot to do, with how Europe was struggling with sovereignty issues, with religion, etc. But the positive that came out of that was probably one of the first sort of peace accords that set some boundaries and gave some system, and visibility to countries inside Europe. So it was a positive. If we look at World War II, again, a massive world war, lots of global engagement with it. On a negative side, positively going forward, things we benefit today from World War II would be things like the United Nations and Bretton Woods agreements. So we have some positive things that have come out of there as a world. And then not necessarily a war, but if you look at 2008, we had a financial crisis. And again, on a systemic change level, we ended up with the G20 and some economies working together so to not have these global crises before. So we could see that systemic change is possible. Cooperation happens inside war. If World War II, we had the Allies. In more recent times, we probably saw the largest cooperative action between countries that normally didn't work together when Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990. And we had 32 countries come together and build a cooperative force. Again, it's a negative thing because it's a war, but think about countries, particularly think about Russia and the United States working together. This was not far from the end of the Cold War, and they came together in a cooperative way. So I think we're already seeing that inside industries where businesses who are competitors are working together to help solve some of the issues around COVID. I'd be remiss if I didn't throw a sport analogy in here for you or an example. So let me talk a little bit about how in sometimes of a crisis, you can find new talent. If you're a football fan, you might actually remember the 1999 St. Louis Rams, which don't exist anymore. They were not a good team. They had come off probably their worst season ever. And in the preseason, their starting quarterback tore up his knee and he was done. They had a little known backup quarterback at the time, whose story was he had been cut 5 years previous, had gone in and out of NFL Europe and the Arena Football League, and was literally bagging groceries in a grocery store to try to keep his sport dream alive. This is Kurt Warner, and he was the second string quarterback. He took over for the team and probably put together one of the best seasons possible in the NFL. Won the Super Bowl, was the Super Bowl MVP. So he was somebody that you would have looked at before the crisis hit that team, not going to play a role, not the talent they were looking for, but the crisis allowed him to emerge. So thinking about that in your own companies, there's a lot of talent that exists. We're seeing it happen inside of our own universities as we've flipped and moved to these online courses. We're seeing talent come out where we didn't know existed before. With any crisis comes things like rapid problem solving and innovation. And I think we've seen calls for that immediately here, right? People are funding innovation. When I was looking back at what's a good example of this, this has been a major TV movie, so you may have seen it. This would be the Deepwater Horizon rig that exploded in the Gulf of Mexico. 87 days of uncontrolled, largest oil spill in the industry, big environmental disaster. So you say to yourself, what positive came out of that? What didn't exist when it exploded was that they didn't have a capping system. So they couldn't figure out how to cap this. And yes, they had 87 days and they put it together, but that's probably faster than if they had been trying to put it together, a solution. So this capping stack they came out with to finally stop this disaster is now an industry standard. So we see an innovation, a rapid solving of a problem, and then a solution that's industry wide. And then I'll talk a little bit about policy and an impact, and I think we're going to see more of that related to COVID. If you remember, in 2011, a tsunami hit Japan, and in that time period, we ended up with it hitting the Fukushima, the nuclear plant. So 4 of their 6 reactors were hit, and it was a massive nuclear disaster. So less about how they dealt with it, but more about how other countries saw what happened. And in particular, Germany and their Chancellor Angela Merkel immediately decided to change the policy in Germany and move away from nuclear energy, shut down 8 plants immediately, switched to a long-term plan for renewable energy, and moving basically away from nuclear energy by 2022. So it's a massive policy shift that another country took by seeing this crisis. So I'd be remiss also if I didn't throw in a little bit of an occupational health and safety example. So I think as Canadians, we probably remember the Listeria outbreak at Maple Leaf Foods in 2008. Again, another tragedy and crisis. People lost their lives, and a company had to deal with probably the worst thing that could have occurred in their field. And what did they do? So I will say immediately, there was a swift reaction, and we study this in crisis communication all the time. You need to have somebody who quickly takes control and communicates, and they did that. And number one was the CEO took control. He showed leadership, but probably the best thing he did immediately was apologize. And that's usually what we see in crisis communications as the best step forward. But it was beyond just the immediate response. They had to figure out how to save their company and indeed still stay in the industry. And so from the occupational health and safety point of view, they did something that we probably hadn't seen before. They redirected all of their energies and resources to improving food safety. No one else could hire in the company but something that was to deal with food safety. And the policy was to hire the best people you could, no matter the cost. And so they completely flipped around their focus on health and safety. They created a 8:30 meeting every morning. And from what I've read, they still do this, where they deal with everything that arises health and safety wise from the day before. So this is your safety meetings. They became a real part of it. And for at least 2 years, the CEO led those meetings. So from the top down, they changed their culture. They changed their technical systems. They did an overhaul of that. So they really took this opportunity to flip their entire business. It took them a while, but in a year post this crisis, they were turning a profit again as a corporation. So if you're thinking about right now and you're sitting in your corporation, what do you think that you could do to take maybe some opportunity out of the crisis? I think maybe taking a page from what Diana said earlier today, from everything I read, and the first thing you want to do is probably pause and take some time for reflection. What we all do when a crisis hits, and I think I can remember doing this even in my own home, is where you have this fight or flight response. It's a biological thing and you just want to immediately do something. And so we go into these sort of hyper modes, right? And we're not taking time to reflect. And I think if you're in management and you're in a corporation, you need to find that time to reflect. There might be an immediate need, as with the Maple Leaf case, but then you need to take that time to reflect and say, what are our next step. So step one would be taking that. The next thing is you need to ask the right questions, but you need to ask open and active questions about the crisis and its impact on your corporation, your business, your day-to-day operations, to reframe the problem, right? So COVID is an immediate shutdown situation. Everything got shut down. What are the questions we need to ask about the impact on our business, our industry, our workers, and ask the right questions, reframe it, and deal it from that point forward. And that takes a little bit of time as well. So you need to have a little time to ask that. And then when I think about, the example of Kurt Warner, maybe the sport example, I'll go back to what I'm most comfortable with. You need to figure out a way to let this talent rise in your corporation and bring people together. So set up a system for sharing ideas, right? Get something flowing that every idea comes to the table. And then the next step built on that is encourage your employees to experiment and give permission to fail. I can't think of how many times trying to cap that well in 87 days that they may have failed, but eventually they got to the right solution, right? And so we need to create room for our talent to rise and room for that talent to try out their ideas, fail, but eventually get to the right innovation that's going to help us. And then the other thing that I learned reading a little bit about the Maple Leaf case was that, they had seen, and in retrospect, they said they could see a pattern and of increases in problems day to day. And so they wanted to, figure out how to better deal with that. And then they realized as they were looking at it from one lens and they weren't seeing the anomaly. So a lot of times our brains are trained to look for patterns, right? Patterns in our data that we get about our production from the day before, but there's anomalies inside of the data. And sometimes those anomalies are the best things that we can look for both providing solutions, but also to know if there's a crisis coming to our own corporation. And the last step, I think that from my reading, and I think it's important for all of us, is really to stay hopeful in these situations. And the reason I say that is we're our most imaginative, we're our most creative and innovative when we are still hopeful for a positive outcome, right? So if we've all been talking about this, I think Diana's steps today are going to be really helpful in dealing with when you go in and out of the positive side of it. But if you can think about that in terms of your workforce and your employees and bringing that hopefulness to work that allows them to maintain, imagination and creativity, I think that's probably a good place to end and think about how you do that inside your corporations. So that's sort of a trip down history and a little bit of innovation and positivity that have come out of large crises or tragedies that maybe we can take this and reframe a little bit of our thinking about the global pandemic we're all in right now.
Thank you very much, Anne. That's some really fascinating kind of historical perspective, and that we can definitely learn from. So thank you for sharing that. I know we'll have a lot of room for discussion. And so on that note, we will now move into our discussion format with some questions from the audience and some discussion between our panelists. So the first question is for Diana. So Diana, is there a way to practice, say, acknowledging a negative feeling and managing it before an actual event occurs?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So this has to do with self-awareness, right? Like your ability to focus internally and understand, right, when a feeling is emerging. So you can practice self-awareness in so many different ways. And the problem with a lot of people these days is that they're very distracted, right? So people are running around and moving from one thing to the next thing and multitasking. And so some people have sort of lost that ability to focus and to notice when things are emerging. And then if you couple that with negative judgment, then you've got a real problem, right? So if a feeling starts to emerge and you don't notice it, then what happens is you're much more likely to react, right? So a lot of, in my research, we've mostly worked with marginalized children and youth. And for a lot of these children and youth, they have a lot of feelings, but they're not able to identify what these things are. So they're very reactive, right? So a lot of these kids get in trouble a lot at school because they're not able, like they don't have the self-awareness that they need, so they can't make good decisions about their feeling, right? So Toby, you mentioned at the beginning that like one of my expertise is in mindfulness, and we've been studying this since 2005, so a long time. But mindfulness, if you can practice mindfulness, that really is about developing your self-awareness and this ability to make good choices about what you're feeling, right? So one of the things I always tell people when I work with them is that it's really important to understand that feelings don't emerge for no reason. Like if you start feeling something, there's a reason for it, whether you know the reason or not. So what we want to do is have an attitude of curiosity about what we're feeling, right? So if you start to feel anxious all of a sudden, try and notice that and ask yourself, okay, why is this happening right now? Like, what was I thinking about? Did somebody say something? Did I see something, right? Like, if you do that, you will eventually sort of figure it out. And one of the ways that I suggest that people practice mindfulness, so this ability to focus, right, to have a less distracted mind, is through what's called daily life mindfulness. So this is really great if you feel overwhelmed and you don't have time to do a lot of reading or practicing, mindful breathing or whatever. So for example, today, if you have to wash dishes, if you have to eat something, I'm assuming we're all going to eat something at some point today, try and bring your focus to that, right? So like how many of you wash dishes and actually pay attention to what the water feels like, what the soap smells like, to the process of washing your dishes? Like most people do this very mindlessly, right? They're doing stuff, but they're really not focusing on what they're doing. Same thing with eating. Like if you eat something, like look at it, right? Notice, what does it look like? What does the texture look like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? Like put it in your mouth and roll it around right before you start eating it, and notice what's happening in your mouth. So it's that practicing of focusing on what we're doing, right? So with daily life mindfulness, you don't have to add anything to your day. Just pick something you have to do anyway. It could be folding laundry, could be anything, right? And what I find with a lot of people I work with, when they start to do this, they realize just how distracted they are. Like they realize how they're going through life and their mind is always somewhere else, right? So that you want to sort of attend to that and try to be more aware and focused, so that you have the ability when things do emerge to make good decisions about them, rather than to be in this kind of reactive state. Yeah.
Thanks, Diana. I can absolutely identify with so much of what you're saying. So that's very, very helpful. And I particularly like the phrase. I like that attitude of curiosity. I really like that framing too. That's very neat. So thank you. And so next question is for Anne, and kind of building off your talk, Anne. Is there a way to easily or say efficiently identify the key people that you need to solve problems in your organization, or is there like a set mechanism to bring out their assets quickly in terms of crisis?
I think every corporation can design something differently. I think my thoughts are on this, at least from my experience, would be we're very quick to go back to the people we rely on all the time. And I'm not saying that they're not good people and they haven't been there for you, but they've been in the inside, or they've been in your management team, or they've been in part of whatever led up to the crisis, if it's one that's your company's facing. So my thoughts on this is you need to create a mechanism, a way that people anywhere in your corporation can participate and provide their thoughts on the problem, whether that's an open forum, whether that's an anonymous kind of Google form that people can fill out, or something that allows them to identify their idea, and if they want to, who they are, because sometimes we don't get outside our comfort zone with the people we're used to working with. So that'd be the first advice I give. And to do it quickly, I think is you gotta be ready to react to the crisis quickly. So grab your crisis plan and think about it and enact it. And then find these people, let them come to the front. And then when you do find them, it's those other things that I talked about. You have to let them use their imagination, and you have to let them fail without consequences, because that's probably one of the biggest fears we would have. If I'm not charged with solving the problem in the business and I come forward with an idea and I fail, am I done? Are you going to fire me? I'm not an upper management person. So you have to create that environment that they'll bring the ideas forward. They'll try to help enact them. And if failure happens, it's still okay. They're trying to help the company. So my quick thoughts on that.
No, that makes sense, and I like just even that example of like that anonymous Google kind of. Yeah. I mean, it's like that's just take advantage of the technology we got today. That's cool. That's just it seems like an obvious thing, but if more corporations kind of like thought about that'd be really cool for dealing with the crisis. So now next question will be for Diana, and I know you had kind of talked a little bit kind of with mindfulness and like the well-being of children, and we've got a question just looking if you can maybe expand just a little bit about how we can teach children to focus less on what people think about them.
Yeah, so it's a very, very common issue, right? And I work with a lot of kids in my practice, and a lot of children and youth right now are feeling a lot of anxiety, and it's very easy for kids to get caught, and for adults too, to get caught up on what people think about them. So, one of the things I do with them is we talk about like this issue of control, right? And you can draw, I just drew it really quickly. Well, actually you can't see it, but so imagine if you're drawing, draw a circle and then a bigger circle around it. And inside the inner circle, write down all of the things that you control. And then outside of that circle, write all of the things you don't control, right? So you can do that with your child and get them to think about, this will help them to think about the things they control and the things they don't control. And the things they don't control is all the stuff about other people, right? What other people are saying, what other people are doing. You can use specific examples of things that have happened, but that helps them to think about where is a lot of their focus, where's a lot of their energy going, right? And it actually it can be really helpful in terms of giving them some strategies and hope, like Anne was talking about hope, it's really important for kids to feel in control, like they can do something about what's going on, right? So like I remember once I was talking to a child about being in school and having to deal with difficult peers, and they were feeling really afraid and really anxious. Well, what if this peer does this? What if they do something mean to you? So, let's talk about, okay, so what can you do if that happens? What's in your control? Well, you can actually physically get up and leave. You can go and tell the teacher. There's lots of things they can do, but they often don't feel like that. They often don't think like that, right? They just get caught up in the fear of what someone's going to do. So it's very, that's one way to sort of talk to them about, and then, talk to them about how much energy and power they're giving people to influence how they feel. And are there some people that shouldn't be having that power, right? Like I always say, okay, there's always people in your life that you trust and that are good people, and what they say we may want to listen to. But there's a lot of people who don't fit that criteria, right? They may not have our best interests at heart. So do we really want to give them all of that power to influence how we're going to feel? So, that's sort of just briefly kind of something a conversation you can have with them.
Thanks, Diana. That makes a lot of sense, and also, I mean, that also applies I imagine to adults as well. The sense of am I choosing to give that power to those other people? So I like that. And to me, this I know that's a very individual type thing, but it almost seems like there would be a way to organizations should take note of these types of resilience building frameworks on the individual level that Dan is talking about. And so is there ways that an organization could say work to be, build that individual level resilience, or to help make an organization more psychologically safe, between crises or in preparation for crisis?
Well, I think you said the right thing right there. If you have a psychologically safe workplace, I think you're going to build a workforce that is resilient, but also one that's going to be participatory in solving all your problems and feel safe to do that, right? If you have a workplace where you don't have that kind of a culture, and it's a very either individualistic or it's a very difficult culture to deal with, and people don't feel like they're a part of it, we're all not going to get in the same boat together and row in the same direction. And so I think if you focus on that psychologically safe workplace idea, building that into your culture, I think you will be more resilient as a company when a crisis does happen, but you'll also have the entire ability to mobilize your talent workforce, because they're going to be in it with you, right? And feel they're a part of it. And I think that's probably really key when we watch some companies really do well when these things happen to them, is because they have that kind of a culture.
That makes sense. Thanks, Anne. And I think, so I've got one more question for Diana. And so this one is, if you touched on this kind of idea of like self-compassion. And I think this plays into this. And it's like, how does granting permission to feel bad during hard times, I mean, can that in some cases erode resilient development, or is there generally, like, does that support resilient development?
Yeah, no, I think that's about being a healthy person. So, challenging moments are part of everybody's life, and you don't want to try and get rid of those. So, you have to kind of think of life as a series of moments, and in a particular moment, you might be having a hard time. And if you can learn to sort of ride that out, I say, like, ride it out like a wave. So, there's a beginning and there's a crest and then there's an end, right? If you can ride your feelings out like that, then they pass. They don't become all consuming. Like the problem when people are distracted and not self-aware is that wave starts, but then it just keeps going up and up. There's never sort of, because a person's not kind of riding it out, right? So, like, dealing with grief and loss, for example, like, you have to let yourself be in those difficult moments, right? And ride them out. And when you do, they're moments and they pass, and then you go on to another moment, right? So that's very much a part of being healthy and being able to actually build our resilience and build our mental health. And so that goes back to what I was saying before about recognize that these aren't regular times, and everyone's going to have off days and times when we're not motivated, and like, that's okay, right? Just I think those words, that's okay, can be really powerful, right? Like, say you're feeling unmotivated and you feel guilty because you think you should be working. You know what? Just tell yourself, okay, like, this morning, today, I'm tired, I'm not on the top of my game, and that's okay. That can be really powerful, and understand that moment will end, and then, you'll get motivated again, right?
I like that, and it all comes back to that mindfulness and that being the moment. And actually, there was someone who asked about where they can buy can find your book, and so I'm guessing that's on your website at dianacohlic.com.
Yeah, the link is on the website.
Okay.
Yeah, the link to the publisher is on the website. Yeah.
I know I could definitely. Yeah, I'm interested myself. And last question for today is to Anne, and just really, like, very quickly, is there, like, one organization or that maybe stands out to you during COVID that you've been impressed with on how they've maybe adapted to the crisis, or something that jumps out? And that's okay if not. Just someone that maybe people can say, hey, they did a great job, or I could learn from that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the inner workings of every corporation out there, so I don't know how it's perceived inside. Locally, I think a company that I saw, I guess we would say, pivot and provide and support the community has been Cover Gals and the production of masks that they've done. They've jumped in and helped industry, and CROSH has worked with them. So I think that's a great example. If we want to talk about businesses who took an opportunity and had to reinvent themselves, I'll go back to sports and tell you, I think that particularly women's sports, they put on a bubble the WNBA for women's basketball started, well, the NWSL for women's soccer first, and then the WNBA, and then the NBA followed. And they built a safe environment for their athletes, their employees, to participate and to achieve what they needed to do, because if they didn't play, they didn't get paid. So they provided an opportunity for their employees still to achieve salaries, particularly important in women's sports. But those aren't sustainable models. I say those like a great opportunities, and all of those leagues and companies are dealing with the same thing. Bubbles are hard to sustain financially, and I think mental health wise for a long period of time. The athletes coming out of them are saying, great, we got to finish our season and we got paid, but mental health wise to be in those bubble and artificial environments was very difficult. So I think it's a one-time win for me to see what they did and to provide those opportunities, but long term, I think those are hard to sustain.
Understood. Thank you. That makes sense. And yeah, for personally having dealt with cover gals, I know that they've done an amazing job, and they actually made the CROSH masks, which are fantastic. So, but I really like that example of the WNBA as well. So thanks, Dan. And I wish I have so many more questions for both of you that I wish we had time for, but unfortunately we have to wrap it up. So I will instead just thank you both very much for taking the time to share your expertise and knowledge with all of us today. So thank you, Dr. Diana Cohlic, and thank you, Dr. Ann Pegoraro. And thank you, all of you, for joining us for this CROSH COVID Conversations. And please tune in next week. It's our last installment, and we'll be talking about the mechanisms of COVID-19 and why you should vaccinate. And that's going to be with Dr. Sandra Dorman of Laurentian University and Dr. Caitlin Malarkey of McMaster University. So until next time, wishing you all to keep well and to stay safe.